This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, let's deal with the last verse of the Gospel reading first. It's the one that says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." That's a strange verse, isn't it? A strange request from Jesus. He had just taken Peter, James, and John up on the mountain, and while there some amazing stuff happened, you'd think Jesus would have wanted them to tell everyone about it. You'd think that maybe that was even the reason he took them up with him in the first place. But no, Jesus says, "Tell no one." So why is that? Well, this is an interesting little feature of much of the gospel stories about Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus often instructs the disciples not to tell others about him. Not yet, at least. Usually, the warning not to tell others comes with a qualifier. Don't tell until after Jesus has been raised. The point seems to be that until people know the whole story of Jesus, until they see that he has not come to be some sort of glorious, popular Messiah, that spreading the word about him could give people the wrong impression. And so each time there's some sort of happening, like the Transfiguration, where the news about it might pique the wrong kinds of expectations, Jesus says, "Tell no one." We, of course, we are past that now. It's interesting for us to understand why that was important then, but now we are on the other side of Jesus having been raised. And we don't need to keep Jesus and his glory a secret. It's just the opposite for us. We want to tell others about Jesus. And I think this story about Jesus and his transfiguration gives us a way to think about how we might do just that. So ponder with me this experience for Peter and James and John in Matthew chapter 17. Jesus had called these 3, along with some others, to be his disciples all the way back in Matthew chapter 4. So they'd been with Jesus for a while now, 13 chapters worth of events in the gospel story, representing months or years in real life. Along the way, they'd seen a lot. They'd seen Jesus teaching and healing. They'd seen Jesus casting out a demon and calming a storm. They'd seen Jesus feeding a crowd of thousands with a little bread and fish. But up until this point, they'd never seen anything like this transfiguration. Transfiguration is just a fancy church word we use to describe what in many ways was probably indescribable. The gospel reading, in fact, seems to struggle to know what to say happened. It says, "He was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white." And if that wasn't amazing enough, suddenly there appeared there to them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. You'd think that upon seeing all that the disciples would have been like, "Bah!" But instead, Peter simply says, "Lord, it is good for us to be here." He was very subtle in that way. Perhaps he was Lutheran. But we know what he meant. He meant we are in the presence of God in a mysterious and powerful way. And this is good. It is good for us to be here. Maybe you sitting here today, have had an experience like that one. Not the literal transfiguration of Jesus or the appearance of past saints of God, but an experience where you felt you were in the presence of God in a mysterious and powerful way, and it was good to be there. What do we do with those kinds of experiences? When something like that happens to you, you have a profound spiritual experience, or you feel the guiding hand of God in your life, or you know clearly that Jesus is with you in a moment of need. What do you do? I think what God wants us to do is to tell about that. To tell. Remember, we are not living in those days before the resurrection tell no one days. We are living in the Jesus is raised and the Spirit of God is loose in the world days. And that means we can be curious about what God is up to and seek to name the ways that God is active in our lives. So here's a little experiment. Something for each of us to try this week. Let's take Peter's subtle little statement. It is good for us to be here. This week, my challenge for you is to pay attention. Pay attention to the ways you see and you hear and you feel God's presence. And when those moments come, for we do believe God will come, I invite you to say, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Maybe you can say it as a prayer, a word of thanks to God. Lord, it is good for us to be here. Or maybe you can say it to another as a way of telling others about the Jesus who comes. It is good for us to be here. We call this day the festival of the Transfiguration because it recalls that event where Jesus was changed before the disciples' eyes, revealing his glory. But we know that the disciples, after experiencing that, were also changed. There was transformation for them. Just like there is for us every time God comes to us in mysterious and powerful ways. How will God be transforming you this week? And what will you tell about it?